The day had started in a haze of hospital blue. Neon tubes buzzed overhead, casting pale light across machines that beeped in slow, final rhythms. His eyes hadn't left the monitor in over an hour, watching numbers drop as if gravity were pulling her away. The nurses had stopped coming in. They knew it was close. They had done this before. The kindness in their faces had turned into silence, their movements gentle and rehearsed. No one spoke, not when it was this near the end. He had sat with her all night, clutching her hand between his, feeling her warmth fade by degrees. It had once been the hand that held his head to her chest when the world was too cruel, the hand that wiped dirt from his cheek, that gripped his shoulder too tightly when she was afraid for him. Now it barely moved. Now it was a ghost of what it had been. He didn't cry when the line on the monitor flattened. He didn't scream when the breath left her. He just sat there, blinking as if waiting for the hospital to correct itself. As if someone would walk in and say there had been a mistake. But no one did. A nurse came in and turned the machine off. Someone else covered her with a white sheet. They asked if he needed anything. He didn't answer. He stood slowly, like gravity had grown stronger. He gathered his things, just a backpack, his hoodie, and a sealed envelope with discharge paperwork. He didn't look back when he walked out the door. He didn't trust himself to. The hallway outside stretched long and sterile, footsteps echoing like gunshots. The elevators took forever. People smiled politely at him. No one knew. To them, he was just another man in a hoodie. A tired sun. Not a grieving one. The sun outside was too bright. It stung. He didn't know where to go. There was no home waiting. The apartment had felt empty even when she was still breathing in it. Now it would be unbearable. So he walked. No destination. Just a direction. South. Into the city. The buildings around him blurred together in slabs of glass and brick. Noise surrounded him but didn't penetrate. Car horns, brakes screeching, distant music, none of it reached him. He passed by cafes and storefronts, people laughing into phones, delivery trucks unloading crates of fruit and bread. Life moved on and he was no longer a part of it. At a crosswalk, the light turned red. He waited without seeing it. A man in a suit brushed past and mumbled something irritated, but he didn't register it. His feet moved when others did. His body floated through intersections like smoke. Hunger gnawed at him, but he ignored it. There was a diner across the street, but the idea of sitting at a table without her was unbearable. He kept moving. The bus stop appeared out of nowhere. A bench. A schedule he didn't read. He boarded the next bus without checking the number. He paid with the last few coins he had, the machine spitting out a wrinkled transfer. He walked to the back, sat down, pulled his hood up. His head leaned against the cold window. The seat vibrated with the engine's hum. He didn't notice the woman until she sat 2 rows ahead of him. She glanced back once. Her face turned slowly. Her eyes narrowed. Then came the sniff. The wrinkling nose. The subtle leaning away. Her bag was pulled tighter against her hip. She whispered something to the woman next to her. More glances followed. Then a louder inhale, followed by the scraping of shoes as she stood. She faced him directly, her voice sharp and loud enough to silence the humming conversations. "Sit somewhere else. You stink." The words detonated in the enclosed space. The driver didn't say anything. No one did. Heads turned. Some stared. Others looked away. The accusation floated above him, heavy and public. He didn't react. Didn't move. Just blinked. Because an hour ago he'd lost the only person who would have told him he was still clean. Still good. Still worthy of being anywhere. The bus kept moving. And outside the window, the city didn't even pause. The ride continued as though nothing had been said. The bus groaned down the avenue, stopping every few blocks to exhale new passengers into the aisles. No one sat near him, even as the bus grew full. People avoided the seats around him as if they were marked. A teenager with headphones looked at him, then looked away. An older man stepped toward his row, hesitated, then found another place to stand, gripping the overhead bar with knuckles as pale as disbelief. He didn't flinch. Didn't defend himself. He just stared out the window, letting the passing storefronts blur into one another. Restaurants, pawn shops, a church with peeling paint, a liquor store glowing red in the midday light. He didn't see any of them. Not really. He saw her. Her hands always moving. Her voice calling from the kitchen. Her favorite song playing on the radio. He remembered her laugh, rough and radiant like gravel under sunlight. And then he remembered how still her face had become when the machine stopped. That silence echoed now in the space between his heartbeats. His fingers tightened around the crumpled hospital badge still tucked into his coat pocket. The ink had smeared completely now. It was just a wrinkled square of plastic and adhesive. But to him, it was sacred. The last thing that held proof of that final hour. The final place she had been. The bus stopped again, this time at a major transfer station. Dozens of people poured in. The woman who had spoken to him earlier left the bus with a satisfied huff, her steps clipped and purposeful. Her departure felt like a cold front leaving the room. A few seats opened, but no one filled his row. A mother pulled her child closer as she walked by. The child looked at him with curiosity, not fear, and smiled. He offered a weak smile in return. It was the only one he could manage. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't go home. The apartment was full of echoes, her slippers by the couch, a half-knitted scarf draped over the armrest, a photo on the fridge with his birthday cake from years ago. He wasn't ready to see it again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The bus moved further into the city toward districts they'd never visited together. He remembered her always saying she wanted to see more of it, the museums, the botanical garden, the riverside promenade. But time and money had always slipped through their fingers like sand. Survival came first. Dreams came second. And now dreams were all he had left. At the next stop, he stood up without thinking. His legs carried him off the bus into unfamiliar air. The sky was beginning to gray, clouds gathering in quiet layers above rooftops. He walked slowly like a man carrying invisible weight. The people around him moved quickly, phones in hand, bags over shoulders, voices raised in laughter or frustration. He moved against the grain, unnoticed and unbothered. A public park lay ahead, its gates open and paths slick from a recent rain. Benches lined the walkway, most of them empty. He found one near a pond and sat, hunched forward, elbows on knees. A duck drifted across the water. Children screamed in the distance, chasing pigeons. He let the sounds wash over him without anchoring to any. And then the tears came again. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet rivulets down his cheeks, soaking into his hoodie. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. Let them stain. Let them speak in ways he no longer could. The woman on the bus hadn't seen grief. She had seen a mess. A boy with a dirty sweatshirt and hollow eyes. She hadn't seen the son who had just lost the center of his world. And in that moment, he realized that most people never would. He sat there for what felt like hours, his breath steady but shallow, watching the sun slip lower behind the buildings. As the sky dimmed, a streetlight flickered on above him. The bench felt colder now. The wind carried a chill that slid through his clothes. His body ached, but he stayed. Because there was no destination left. Only forward. Only through. And the silence of the city finally matched the silence inside him. The light from the street lamps turned golden as evening claimed the city. The park emptied slowly, laughter fading into the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. He sat motionless on the bench, soaked not in rain but in a quiet grief that clung to his clothes like smoke. Around him, the world retreated. The pond grew still, glassy and dark. Trees swayed gently overhead. In the fading light, everything felt further away. Every sound, every movement, every memory. He pulled the hood tighter over his head, the fabric pressing against his ears, muffling what little of the city still reached him. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. A message, probably. He didn't check. There were no words left to receive that would undo the finality of what had happened. No condolence could return her voice. No emoji could capture the empty weight sitting in his chest. He thought of the apartment, the silence that would greet him there, the chair where she used to read, now permanently vacant, the smell of the cooking she never got to finish. He had left the stove light on. He wasn't sure why he remembered that now, but it haunted him. Something about that light still burning in a room she would never enter again. A gust of wind passed, lifting loose leaves across the pavement in spirals. He stood, slow and aching, and began to walk again, deeper into the city's shadows. His legs moved out of obligation rather than purpose. The ground beneath him felt unfamiliar, even though he had walked these streets before. Grief did that. It rewrote the geography of your world, made every alley foreign, every storefront a relic from another life. He wandered into a quiet block, where old brownstones stood like monuments of another era. Most windows were lit, families moving behind curtains, distant flickers of televisions and warm dinners. He passed a laundromat still open, its fluorescent lights buzzing and blinking above a flickering sign. Inside, a woman folded towels, unaware of the ghost walking past her window. He turned down an alley, narrower than the rest, bordered by brick walls stained with time. It was a shortcut he had taken years ago, back when they used to walk together to the clinic. She'd always hated the alley, said it smelled like old rain and regret. But he'd liked it then, the quiet, the way the walls felt like they swallowed the noise of the city. Now they swallowed him too. Halfway through, he leaned against the wall and slid down to sit, the bricks cold against his back. He closed his eyes. Let the city vanish. Let everything vanish. Memories pressed against him like ghosts. Her voice humming through the apartment, her hands braiding his hair when he was small, her laughter filling their tiny kitchen. He remembered the way she'd pretend not to be tired after double shifts, how she still danced to old soul music in her slippers. He remembered the day she told him she was sick, and the way she'd held his face like he was the one who needed comforting. Tears returned, slow and raw, as if torn from the deepest part of him. There was no one here to see, no one to judge. He wept into the fabric of his hoodie, hands covering his face like a shield against a world that hadn't noticed her absence. He didn't know how long he stayed there. Minutes, hours. Time had warped. The alley felt like a waiting room for a life he hadn't yet stepped into. When he finally stood again, his legs protested. His knees were stiff, his hands trembling. He dusted off the back of his pants, though there was no one to see. It was muscle memory, a survival instinct. He emerged from the alley just as a city bus hissed to a stop at the nearby corner. He hesitated, staring at it. Another route, another seat, another ride to nowhere. He boarded it anyway. The driver glanced at him, said nothing. The interior was nearly empty. He sat near the middle this time, not the back. The hoodie still clung to him. The badge still sat in his pocket. The pain still throbbed behind his eyes. But he sat. No one said a word. No one told him to move. And as the bus pulled into the night, he leaned his head against the window and closed his eyes, letting the hum of motion carry him forward, if only for a little while longer. The hum of the engine vibrated through his bones, steady and low, like the sound of a heartbeat beneath the skin of the city. The lights outside blurred past in smears of red and gold, the kind of quiet electric glow that only arrived after dusk had settled for good. Inside the bus, silence reigned. There were no loud conversations, no confrontations, just the occasional shuffle of feet, the soft hiss of doors opening and closing, the low cough of an old man 2 rows away. He sat in the middle now, no longer hiding at the back, no longer pressed into shadows. Not because he felt brave or healed, but because the edges of his pain had dulled into something heavier. Grief didn't shrink. It settled. It crawled into the spaces between breaths, sat in the chest like a permanent resident. The bus turned down a long stretch of road flanked by warehouses and fenced lots. Here, even the streetlights looked tired. He reached into his pocket again, pulling out the hospital badge. Its corners were soft, creased from hours of being held, touched, clutched like a talisman. His fingers brushed the faded ink, the ghost of his name still visible, like a whisper trapped in plastic. He closed his eyes and let the weight of it anchor him. The driver announced a stop. He recognized the intersection, an old neighborhood where they used to live when he was younger, before the rent climbed, before the buildings were sold to faceless developers. The store where she used to buy milk was now a wine bar. The pharmacy where she once begged for discounted antibiotics was a boutique with candles in the window. He stepped off the bus and into the wind. The streets here remembered him. He could feel it. The cracks in the sidewalk where he once tripped, the mural half faded on the wall near the laundromat. Ghosts of laughter and arguments and ordinary life still lived here, pressed into brick and dust. He walked with slow, dragging steps, not toward anything in particular, just following the pull of memory. He found the old apartment. The front gate was different, shiny now, coated instead of rusted. But the stairs creaked the same. He didn't try to go in. He just stood across the street and looked at the window that used to be theirs. Second floor, third from the left. The curtain was different, but the light was the same. Dim, soft, warm. He stared at it until it blurred. Eventually, he turned and wandered down the block, finding a diner that hadn't changed. Same flickering sign, Same cracked menu board in the window. Inside, it was mostly empty. A man read a newspaper in a booth near the back. A waitress leaned on the counter, scrolling through her phone. He entered slowly, the door's bell breaking the silence with a soft chime. She looked up, her eyes pausing on his face, then his clothes, then his hands. But she didn't flinch, didn't frown. She just nodded toward a booth and returned to her screen. He slid into the seat, letting the vinyl stick slightly to his jacket. His body ached with a deep, shapeless fatigue. The menu was sticky, its corners curled. He didn't read it. He ordered something simple, eggs, toast, coffee, just to have something warm in front of him. While he waited, he rested his arms on the table and watched the city drift through the windows. Neon signs reflected off the glass. A couple laughed as they passed, drunk on something bigger than wine. A dog barked somewhere distant. The world was still moving. The food arrived without fanfare. He ate slowly, deliberately, each bite a small rebellion against the hollow space inside him. When he finished, he paid with crumpled bills and coins. The waitress gave him change and a nod. No questions, no judgment. Back on the street, the night had deepened, pressed close around his shoulders, cool and constant. He walked again, this time with a little more intention. Toward a park bench, toward a bridge, toward anywhere. Somewhere quiet, somewhere away. He found himself on a pedestrian bridge overlooking the freeway. Cars moved beneath him like rivers of light, endless, unbothered. He leaned on the railing, the metal cold beneath his arms. His breath made clouds in the air. Below, no one looked up. No one knew. But up here, above it all, he finally spoke. Only one word, carried on his breath like smoke. Her name, and the city answered with silence. The wind pushed gently across the bridge, curling through the metal grates and fluttering the edges of his sleeves. He stood still, watching headlights pass like comets beneath him. Time had unraveled into something shapeless. The moments bled into one another like ink in water, indistinct but heavy with color. His body was beginning to feel the cost of wandering, of hunger, of grief that coiled and uncoiled itself inside him like a cold serpent. He moved again. Not quickly, not with purpose. Just forward as he had since he left the hospital. Each step a negotiation between exhaustion and instinct. The city had begun to sleep. Windows darkened one by one. The sounds of life dimmed into echoes. But he didn't belong to sleep tonight. Sleep was for those who were safe, anchored, held. He had no anchor now. He floated between spaces, too tired to go home, too hollow to rest. Eventually, he came across a community center. Closed now, its glass doors locked, its entrance wrapped in the soft glow of security lighting. But the small garden beside it was open. He stepped into it, surprised by its stillness. Raised beds of herbs and vegetables sat in neat rows. A bench waited beneath a trellis. He lowered himself onto it, slowly, like an old man with years behind him instead of just hours. He sat there in silence, the scent of rosemary and mint drifting on the breeze. His eyes scanned the dark sky where clouds swam like oil over stars. He remembered how she used to talk about stars. How she once said on a night just like this that people became stars when they left. He hadn't believed her then. He didn't know if he did now. But still, he searched for something in the sky, some flicker, some sign. The grief rose again, sudden and brutal. It didn't ask permission. It struck like a storm. His shoulders shook. His hands clenched into fists. And he let it. He let it break him, alone and unseen in a garden meant for growing. His tears soaked the sleeves of his hoodie. His breath caught and trembled. He didn't try to stop it. Because this was what it meant to love someone so deeply, this was the price. And then, eventually, the storm passed. What remained wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was something quieter. A stillness. A room within the heart where sorrow could rest without screaming. He sat there until his breathing steadied, until the tremors in his hands faded. The sky didn't answer. The stars didn't speak. But the city did in its own way, in the rustle of trees, in the warmth of distant light, in the resilience of stillness. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the badge again. It was falling apart now, the plastic edge peeling, the adhesive nearly gone. He looked at it for a long time, then folded it carefully and placed it beneath one of the garden stones at the edge of the bench. Not to forget. Never to forget. But to leave something behind. A marker. A moment. A memory rooted in a place that grew things. He rose, the stiffness in his joints reminding him that grief is physical too. He walked out of the garden and back into the street. The first traces of dawn had begun to stain the horizon, pale pink and silver chasing the black from the sky. The streetlights blinked out one by one, replaced by the slow arrival of day. He found a corner store and bought a bottle of water with the last of his change. The man behind the counter didn't speak. Just rang it up, handed it over. The simplicity of it was comforting. He stepped outside, twisted the cap, and drank slowly, the coldness grounding him. The city was waking. Newspaper stands rattled open. Bakery windows lit up. A bus hissed to a stop at the corner. He looked at it for a moment, then stepped aboard. He didn't know where he was going. But this time, it didn't feel like drifting. This time, it felt like beginning. The bus moved steadily through the awakening city, its tires humming against damp pavement, casting brief shadows on buildings still stretching into the light. He sat near the window again, but not pressed against it, not hiding from the world this time. The seat was cold beneath him, the vinyl cracked in places, but it held him. And right now, that was enough. Outside, the streets slowly filled with motion, delivery trucks, cyclists, children gripping backpacks too large for their shoulders. The city had not paused for his grief, nor had he expected it to. What surprised him more was how natural it felt to rejoin its rhythm, to become a part of the flow again. It didn't mean the pain had lessened. It only meant he was learning to carry it. He didn't cry anymore. Not because the sorrow was gone, but because he had wept all that could be wept. What remained was quieter, woven into the fibers of his clothes, the curl of his fingers, the steady thud of his heart. His mother's absence had not created a void, it had created a second presence, one that lived alongside him, unseen but never unfelt. The bus pulled into a terminal at the center of the city. He stepped off with the others, no longer avoiding their eyes. No one recoiled. No one made a comment. Just strangers in motion, each carrying their own invisible stories. He stood on the platform for a moment, letting the morning sun warm his face. It was the first time in days he had noticed the warmth. A coffee shop across the street buzzed with early traffic. He entered, ordered a drink, paid with coins scrounged from the bottom of his backpack. The barista, a woman younger than him with tired eyes, handed him the cup with a quiet nod. He took it without a word and sat by the window. He watched the city live. Watched a man hail a cab and miss it. Watched a couple argue softly before laughing. Watched a woman with a cane walk a dog that seemed to guide her more than the other way around. The world was fragile and ridiculous and relentless. It was beautiful. And he was still in it. In the corner of the cafe sat a small corkboard plastered with flyers, guitar lessons, lost pets, community meetings. One flyer caught his eye, free support group for those who've lost someone. Below it, a handwritten note, Thursdays at 7 p.m. Room 302. You are not alone. He stared at it for a long moment, then stood, tore off one of the tabs at the bottom, folded it into his wallet. He left the coffee shop and started walking again, not wandering now, but choosing. He passed familiar buildings and unfamiliar ones. Past a mural in progress, its colors loud and joyous. Past a boy playing violin on the sidewalk, the open case in front of him lined with nickels and hope. He paused, dropped his last quarter in, and moved on. When he reached the apartment building, he stood across from it for a while. The curtains were still closed. The hallway beyond the glass door was dark. He approached slowly, his steps hesitant but steady. At the door, he fumbled for the keys. They felt heavier than he remembered. The apartment welcomed him with silence. He stepped inside and stood just beyond the threshold. Everything was exactly as he left it, the faint smell of lavender from her diffuser, the flickering light above the sink, the photo on the fridge where they both smiled beneath birthday balloons. He moved through the space carefully, as if afraid to wake it. On the kitchen table lay the half-knitted scarf. He picked it up, brought it to his face, breathed it in. Then he sat at the small dining table and folded his hands. He didn't turn on the TV, didn't reach for his phone, just sat. And in that stillness, in that sacred quiet, he whispered to the room what he hadn't had the strength to say before. I'm still here. The sun spilled slowly through the blinds. The city continued its endless song outside. And inside, he finally let himself belong to the world again.